Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here, and I thought I'd talk about the updated MT-07 for 2021 since I had a chance to sample the popular machine at the recent Australian MT launch. Now obviously the MT-07 hasn't seen a massive update, unlike the MT-09. Instead, it's been on the receiving end of a styling update as well as becoming Euro 5, which necessitated some changes to the exhaust system, mainly noticeable with the collector at the heads and the shield around it. So from a pure riding perspective, it's the same great machine, but largely unchanged except for the styling and emissions updates. The headlight update is the topic which seems to have upset people most, although to be honest, I like the overall look of the bike. Granted, looks are subjective, and if you just hate the styling, there's probably no getting around that, but I think overall, the bike looks good in person. It doesn't blow me away in the headlight department, but there's also nothing I really dislike. My main gripe with the headlight is that it's a bit disproportionate, which leaves the area under the headlight a little bit bare, but that's not something unique to the newer MT models. Looking at many modern motorcycles, we've seen LED headlights allow for a very compact headlight unit, which is probably why we're seeing so many DRL setups, as they allow the headlight unit as a whole to become much larger. Other aspects of the bike that I do like are the tank and the tail, and I do think those areas are a good improvement. While I will admit the headlight was getting very long in the tooth on the previous model. Obviously Yamaha could have thrown the kitchen sink at the MT-07, but then when we look at the recently launched R7, which is a similar package with high spec suspension and brakes, it really seems like they are keeping things simple on the electronics front. People will tell you these days everything needs traction control, wheelie control, quartering ABS, slide control, and so much more. Do you really need any of that on a 600 to 700cc machine, however? Probably not, especially with a package like that of the MT-07. However, as this stuff becomes more common on the competition, the question will become how much you can charge for bikes without it. I guess what will be interesting is to see whether we get an MT-07 SP version with some of the upgrades from the R7. But I digress, the current MT-07. Basically unchanged is the heart of this machine, that 270-degree parallel twin, which offers a great blend of parallel performance with a strong hint of the more V-twin-like torque. It's not as torquey as a V-twin, or quite as smooth as some of the other 650 twins, however it's got bucketfuls of character. Here in Australia we get a special 655cc version to meet our restricted learner segment, however I will say it's amazing how much of the performance they've retained through the middle to low upper range, which is particularly noticeable until you get right up to the top end, where obviously the restricted bike runs out of puff a little bit earlier than the HO version, which is the high output version. What does this mean in real practical terms? Well, before someone from a country where you're forced to start on a 50cc or 125cc comes in and tells me that 650s are utterly inappropriate for new riders, this bike does indeed get used by new riders, primarily in the US in the full power version, here as the 655cc version, and of course in Europe in the tiered scheme as a 35 kilowatt version, which yes is step 2 from my understanding. I can't really say how the A2 version compares to our Lambs version, but the other two versions are certainly viable options for new riders despite the performance on offer. No, it won't be as easy as a 125, no it's not as light, but for larger riders, those with more experience, or those after a bit of a challenge, the MT-07 is a very solid first bike option on the advanced end of things. You've got an easy transition onto power from that throttle with immediate torque from down low, making for forgiving use of the gearbox, which can be a little clunky but is easy to navigate through. The mid-range is the most rewarding, however, with punchy torque that really loves to be revved hard and gotten onto early out of the corners, if you let the throttle off at all. Of course, the MT-07 is also an easy bike to just keep flowing through the corners on the throttle with an exceptional feeling of grip, partially thanks to that firing order and the Pilot Road 5 tyres, which I really rated. It's a little flat up top of the rev range, but still pulls well past legal speed limits, up to the point where they'll probably crush the bike if you get caught, and that's the Lambs or 655cc version I'm talking about. Do you really need that much more performance on the road? I guess it depends on how much you weigh, if you plan on riding 2 up, and just what you think is a reasonable top speed. The chassis is forgiving and a little on the soft side compared to competition like the Z650 or the new Trident 660, even if it is firmer and more controlled than the original Gem MT-07s by a decent margin, in my opinion at least. Keeping in mind I'm about 70 kilos plus gear, if you weigh a fair bit more, it's possible your experience will differ greatly. It's no track scalpel by any means, but honestly the chassis on the MT-07 is one I'd take over many far higher spec bikes for our fairly poor roads here in Australia. Maybe the more limited performance helps the MT-07 shine here too, but it's really solid in my mind despite not really being fancy or super premium. With easy handling and relatively sporty seating position for an upright naked bike, the MT-07 is exceptionally easy to ride for me at 180cm with a 32-inch inseam. The seat is 805mm, which isn't the lowest by any means, but the bike is narrow where you put your feet down, which does really help. It's not quite as taut as the competition I mentioned, but the trade-off is that the chassis is fairly easy going over the rougher stuff, where the firmer loadouts on other bikes can get more out of shape, transfer more harshness to the rider, or suffer in the comfort department as a result. Keeping in mind the suspension is basically non-adjustable, just preload on the rear, which is normal for the segment. I would say the new Trident outshines the MT-07 now as a point of comparison in the suspension department, and it does offer a more premium feel, but that doesn't discount the MT-07 in my mind. Brakes, like most in the category, aren't offering extreme bite, but I want a nice controllable brake character on the road, especially on these smaller capacity machines. There's easy modulation as it stands, and good power via the more effort you put in at the lever. The front master cylinder is quite basic, and you could probably upgrade the pads for a more bite. Would I? That would probably depend on how hard I ride on the weekend. If you want Brembo performance, well, you're not going to get it, but keeping in mind many new riders are picking these machines, I'd say the brakes, like most aspects of this bike, are forgiving and easy to use with high levels of confidence and backed by ABS, of course. Now obviously, while the MT-07 is on the premium end of the beginner market, I'd place it squarely in the all-rounder segment overall, and the somewhat basic spec sheet is a reflection of this. Of course, what makes the MT-07 special is just the combination of everything, making it exceptionally fun, easy to ride relatively fast, and a machine which has good character and will be very rewarding for the right rider. Whenever I jump on the MT-07 LA or the Lambs, I'm always left wondering if it is a full power version as a first impression, with nimble, easy handling that carries a distinctly sporty edge and a willing overall nature that will usher a new rider through those early stages, while being more rewarding as the experience, skills and confidence levels grow. Commuting and filtering through traffic on the MT is easy, predictable, while offering some good thrills on the weekends or on the nicer roads, and being a naked bike, with the more upright ergonomic, the feeling of speed comes on much earlier than something like a sports bike, especially with the ability to play with that mid-range. You shouldn't need to upgrade these tyres till they wear out, again as an average rider. A bit of time on a closed private road also gave the opportunity to test the MT-07 on some of the best tarmac in the country, and while my pace is really on the slow end of things, it was easy to enjoy the overall feel and character of the bike just to have some fun. Granted, I'm not out there trying to set a PB or push my limits, but for a general rider I think the MT-07 has a lot to offer, and that's been reflected in the road bike sales here in Australia for a long time, at least when they were made public. Apparently we've now gone to the US system of hiding all that individual model data, which is a shame as it really did reveal what did well, with the MT-07 a frequent visitor on those lists, and I would even go as far as to say that while the fancy bikes get a lot of attention online, it was actually the basic value-driven machines that were often topping the lists. Now granted, as I said, I'm not riding at 10/10ths, where if you do on this bike, you're likely to hit the limitations of the machine. However, I'd say unless you're a new rider reaching a fairly high skill level and being ready for an upgrade, that's possibly a sign you're expecting too much of the bike in the first place. Certainly now for a bit more money, the MT-09 is an enormous upgrade, and if you're really after something a little bit more track or performance orientated, that's where you should be looking. So a couple of notes that kind of border on criticisms in my mind. The MT-07 retains that LCD display, which is a very cool looking unit and very easy to read. I'm going to be honest here, going between the new MT-09 and the MT-07, I would have been happy with the MT-07 Dash if it displayed all the mode and electronic stuff, even on that 09 model. All TFTs are of course square that I've seen, And the angular LCD on the 7 is a pretty cool styling exercise that's probably not something we'll see from a TFT. Maybe I'm standing in the way of unstoppable progress here, but while I appreciate a nice TFT for all of 5 minutes to start with, after that I just need to see my speed, the time, and the fuel gauge. Even with modes, as long as it's clear and easy to read or change, it doesn't make that much of a difference to me. On the other hand, lighting is now full LED, which I like, as they tend to be a brighter light and give a better throw of light from the headlight, and it saves a bit of cash if you upgrade from halogens as a priority mod. You don't even need to add a relay, or even worse, inline resistors, it's ready to go. Plus, it means people don't fit absolute rubbish eBay LEDs to the bike. I'm sure we've all seen the riders out there whose aftermarket LEDs are so faint that they risk being rear-ended at every turn. Not a smart choice if you ask me. LEDs is something I can get behind being standard, as how much can it truly cost these days? But then, I guess you can say the same about a TFT display. Pricing is fairly typical of the segment at 12.4k here in Australia for the LA or LAMS version, while with the HO or high output version, that's the full power version, bumping that up to 13.2k. The Trident 660 in comparison is 12.7 and the Z650 is around the 11.6 mark. The SV650 is 10.2 and even the CB650R is now under 12k, looking at the pricing for Sydney. Obviously those price points will however vary by where in the world you are. With the Trident raising the bar with the inclusion of traction control and ride modes, which I'll grant probably aren't all that necessary on that machine, it does kind of reorientate the expectations at the various price points, especially while including a TFT. Does that leave the MT-07 pricing a little on the high side? Perhaps, when we consider the competition is almost all below 12k apart from the Trident, but I guess people are far more receptive to a discount than a price rise, so it may have made sense to start that little bit higher. My overall thoughts is that the MT-07 is the same great machine with a facelift, but value is starting to be an area that people will need to judge for themselves. What do you think of the 2021 Yamaha MT-07? Did they get it right? Does it need something more? What about that styling? Let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, stay safe out there.